Hey, everybody, welcome back to Your Inside Track to Success. I'm your host, Stewart Kraintz. And as always, I got a really amazing, awesome guest here for you this week. And before we get started, I want to invite you all to hit subscribe, hit follow, leave us a review because it definitely helps get this show a little bit more relevant in the search so that more people can find it and learn this information, learn from our guests, and apply the tools and the wisdom to their lives. And that's why we're doing what we're doing here on this show. So without further ado, today's guest is someone who's been a really dear friend of mine for several years now. She is an author, a TEDx speaker. She's a podcast host. She's a journalist. And quite frankly, she is somebody who I think embodies the if I dream it and declare it, I'm going to deliver it. And so, without further ado, I wanted to invite my friend Daralyse Lyons on the show. So, welcome, Daralyse. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much, Stu, for having me. I can't wait to have this conversation with you. And thanks to all of those who are listening today.
Yeah, well, thank you again. And you are somebody that has done so much in their career, and I think even created your own career on the fly in a way that suits you and is aligned for who you are and what you are about. And I was hoping we could kick this off by you just sharing your journey going from maybe a career that didn't suit you to one as a journalist.
Yeah. Well, Stu, it's so interesting that you say created because I feel like in many ways it was much more passive and accidental. And I was very unhappy. I was also suffering from an eating disorder at that time. And I felt like my whole life just sort of crumbled around me. I sort of had a nervous breakdown in my mid to late 20s, went into treatment for the 18th time for the eating disorder, came out of treatment and was like,
Wow.
I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know what to do with my life. So I got this job working at a spiritual bookstore
Okay.
and teaching yoga, and like duct taping my financial situation together. I had no idea what I was going to do. I went from like a pretty high salary to having no money in the bank. I started writing again. It was like this part of me that I'd been writing since I was 5 years old. I felt like I lost access to that for periods of time during my active eating disorder. And so I started writing really just for catharsis and to express stories that existed inside of me. And then I just I started to publish and that went well. And then I got invited to oh, why don't you come to this gig thing for freelancers and have conversations with people. And I'm very, I guess I want to say I enjoy talking to people. I'm a curious person. And so I would just have conversations with people and be like, well, have you thought about doing a story on this? And they'd say well, no, but why don't you pitch that to us? And just all of these really weird synchronicities. And then when I wrote a book about being biracial and my experiences with that, because that was I'm a storyteller. And so I wrote that book for kids. And then that got me entry into the DEI space, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging now, DEIB. And so then I started to speak about that and lecture about that and do workshops and interview people and get into podcasting. But it was each step of the way, I feel was not, I'm an intentional person in terms of being ambitious and hardworking, but I don't feel like I had this life plan of things have to turn out this way. Because if I did, I never would have gotten there. I mean, what I'm doing now is not something I could have foreseen in the beginning, but looking back, everything that I'm doing is very much, as you said, aligned with who I am, what lights me up, the things that I'm good at, the things that I feel like I can bring to this world because of my unique identity and purpose. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey, but kind of one that was paved with a lot of tears, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of thinking is this, can I really do this? I've no a lot of imposter syndrome. But yeah, I definitely feel like I am living the life I'm meant to live, and it's been a bumpy road to get here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here because you're doing a lot of really amazing work in the world. So thank you for who you be. And Something that I've talked about a bit on this show, previous episodes, is just my own journey, thinking
Mm,
that I was going to be the next Jerry Maguire, the next hotshot marketing executive in the sports industry, and having an absolute crash and burn experience where ultimately taking all the drama, all the details out of it, it really was just, I think, God, maybe my body, but whatever, forcing me out of something that was so unaligned for who I am and opening the doors that were terrifying to walk through, but opening the doors to helping me find a career, a path that was much more aligned. And since you had your own story of reinvention,
mm.
fraught with the ups and downs,
Yes.
I guess I would love to hear what advice, what suggestions you have for anybody who might be feeling stuck in a career or a current period of their lives where it's just not working.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you spoke about your crash and burn experience, and I certainly had my sort of like falling apart in order to come together experience. I will say though, just kind of backing up a few steps, that
Sure.
for me, you mentioned the soul, and my soul was whispering probably for years that I wasn't happy and that like it wanted me to make a change. And I think one of the people who I think struggle the most are the people who are sort of like a little bit miserable, but not completely in despair, to like give
Wow.
themselves
Yeah.
permission to make a change. And so I just want to say that, like, for me, I think my life had to fall apart in a catastrophic way because I was ignoring that
Hmm.
yearning of my soul. And um, so I guess my like quote unquote advice or my suggestion to people who are listening to this is to listen to the whispers of their soul, before it starts to scream. And if your soul is already at a point where it's screaming to you, like, please take that as a as a wake up call. But I kind of feel like stories like mine and stories like yours, Stu, make it almost sound like someone has to hit bottom in order to kind of
Right.
rebound and move forward differently. But my experience is that people can make changes at any point, and you don't have to ride that elevator all the way down to hell. Just make a change. It's okay. You have permission to take 2 floors down, get off, and and make that climb at any time.
Yeah, and please do, folks, by the way, because hitting that rock bottom is not an enjoyable experience. But to your point exactly, Daralyse, like, I wasn't listening to all the cues and the signs that were very clearly there for a long period, and it took me ending up in the hospital to make the career change. And we don't wish that on anybody. There's a lot of power, I think, in moments of clarity, but
Yes.
also, like, somebody once said to me, you don't necessarily have to bleed for the things that you have in your life. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just checking in with yourself, pausing, meditating, journaling, as
Yeah.
you were doing as a writer. And something I wanted to circle back to is your writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like in our society today, with so much being on our phones, so much being like quick, instantaneous, instant gratification, I don't feel like I meet a lot of aspiring writers each and every day.
Mm.
And I guess I would love to hear what your thoughts are on someone who has creative desire or creative expression, and how they can nurture and cultivate that when they don't feel like there's a lot of active support around them to do so.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I want to say too that, like, just because someone has a kind of like a coming to Jesus moment or a white light moment or whatever, like that for me, that has not been a consistent thing, right? Like, because I have a built-in forgetter. So I like, yes, I have completely reoriented my life. And for me, like, there continue to be moments when I need to tune into the whispers of my soul. And there continue to be moments when I may or may not veer off track, or when I forget myself, or when I have setbacks, etc. Um, but in terms of the writing, I would say that there's different kinds of writers. There's writers who write to express what's going on inside of themselves, like through journaling or through, a blog or whatever. And then there's ones with professional aspirations. And I think my advice would be a little bit different, because I think like if a person is writing just for themselves, just to like express what exists inside, I think they can afford to be a little erratic with that. I think they can afford to like kind of do it a little bit and then maybe not do it for a period of time and then kind of pop back in. I think though, if someone has aspirations of writing professionally, it is really important to consistently invest in that the same way people would invest in any other small business that they're starting or
Sure.
any other project, right? And there will be days when there is that inspiration and when it does feel nurturing, and there will be other days when it does not. And I think almost like for me, writing a book is a bit like parenting. And I'm not a parent, so disclaimer, to anyone who's
Right.
parenting out there, there's a different experience. But I imagine that there are days when your child wakes you up in the morning and it's like, oh my gosh, I love you so much. This is so great. I can't wait to connect with you. And there are days when your child wakes you up in the morning and you're like, oh, can I just go back to bed? This is horrible. And I see writing as a lot like that, or like anything else, right? It's can we commit to the discipline over time and know that more often than not, there is love there is joy there. But like sometimes it's not fun. And if I waited to be inspired to write, I wouldn't have published nearly as many books as I published. I wouldn't be doing this professionally. I wouldn't be able to deal with the rejection that is an inevitable part of writing. But I see it as both an art and a business and a discipline. And so I just know that, there's a certain amount of hours that have to go into it to build mastery. There's a certain amount of time. Not everything I write is going to be good. I've done a lot. I had to kill a lot of my darlings, which is a writing reference about, striking sentences or characters or whatever that doesn't work. So I think like just for me, the biggest thing, if someone has aspirations of writing, is to kind of demystify and demythologize that process and just know that it's like any other endeavor. It's not going to be easy necessarily, but if you commit to it, it will be worthwhile in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm hearing you say like just the discipline of showing up,
Yeah.
writing a page a day or a couple pages a day or whatever the metric is, just to continue to hone the craft. I'm curious, you're talking a bit about being a professional writer, making money at it, whatever that could look like, either as like a author of a book, a novel, young adult, or even just writing for traditional print media in
Yeah.
that sense. What do you feel like is like the downfall between people feeling like they have to make money right out of the gate for their art,
Uh,
and also putting in that time to get really good at the craft?
yeah. Well, so one thing I'll tell you, I've been writing professionally now for well over a decade, and I actually don't make much money at all from my writing. Like, so just like
Right.
dismantle that. And there are others who do, who make like way more than I do. But for me, what the writing has led to is like a lot of different speaking opportunities, a lot of different teaching opportunities, a lot of different, podcast supporters, et cetera, some grant funding. So, for me, I could not fully sustain myself as an author financially. Which is fine, because I don't really do it for the money. I do it because I have to do it, because I can't not. And so I think, your question about someone who feels like they have to make money right out of the gate, I don't think anyone should have a job or a vocation purely for the goal of making money. I mean, I think that's just problematic, because my perspective is that we should be sort of lit up by what we're doing professionally. Or if you're not lit up by what you're doing professionally and that's not your goal, then the professional thing that you're doing should fund the other things in your life that light you up. And those are just my opinions. I'm sure other people feel differently. But I think to go into any sort of career or self-exploration with the stance of like, I need to earn for this, it's sort of like, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like that's not really going to be a sustainable motivation. And I would, I guess, focus on small wins, like maybe getting something published for the first time, or, finally completing a chapter of a novel, or like, getting a rejection and getting some feedback, and then going to take a class about character development or plot or whatever. I mean, I think it's really just about the process and the practice of coming to something and improving at it, and having these tiny little wins along the way.
I'm almost feel like I'm hearing you say just falling in love with the practice itself. Is that fair to
Yeah.
say?
Oh my gosh, 100%. Like, I am in love. And I don't even know that I fell in love. I think it's almost like unfair. I mean, I can't remember a time when I wasn't a writer or a storyteller. And in fact, when I was 5 years old, I used to get in trouble for staying up under the covers with a flashlight and like reading, So I came into this world wired for that. And I know that's not the case for every person who has a creative sort of pursuit or something that lights them up, but I think many of us who do, it's almost like it's interwoven into our DNA. And I think, to your point earlier about the soul, and the soul kind of speaking to us in these various ways too, for me, it's like, yeah, I've fallen in love with writing, but also writing enables me to be who I am. And so I fall in love more with myself because I am being who I am and being true to my own like authentic self exploration. So I would write if I never made a penny. I would like, I just have to do it because it's who I am and I want to love myself. And so if I don't do that, I'm cutting off a part of myself. I'm severing myself from this part of who I am. And then my self love is never going to be complete.
I just got goosebumps listening to you say all that. Thank you for sharing that. And kind of brings to light, I've seen this on a t-shirt, like for sale places, like the
Mm.
quote, art is the youest you can you. And I
Yeah.
feel like you actually just provided all the context behind that t-shirt. So I'm gratefully appreciative of that.
I wish
And
I'd seen that, because I feel like I could have just said what I said so much more succinctly if I just, if I just said
I don't know. I mean, wordsmith that you are, I think that providing that color and context is
that.
probably even more valuable. So thanks for
That's
doing this,
another point I wanted to make when you said about being a wordsmith.
Mhm.
Because earlier you were talking about writing, and something that I have learned that I think may be helpful for anyone listening to this who's wanting to write, or really wanting to do anything creative. Like if you're launching a business and you're coming up with ideas or whatever, it was really helpful for me to learn that the part of the brain that edits is not actually the same part of the brain that writes. And so for idea generation and like, and getting things onto the page, it's actually really helpful not to self-censor, just to like get it all out, purge onto the page. And then after that, it's helpful to separately go back and edit. And I think one of the things where people get stuck is they're trying to edit as they write. And I'm using this also as a metaphor, like because this is the case for people who are launching their own business or doing a painting, or whatever the case may be, right? Like I think as human beings, we can stop ourselves from our own brilliance because there's an expectation that everything, every word has to be significant. Everything that we do has to be like, quote unquote, good. Whereas really, we just have to like get something out there, and then we can trust ourselves to like edit and revise and hone and fine tune. And so I think it's really important for people not to have that expectation, like the expectation that they're going to make $1 million on their first novel, or the expectation that that first novel is going to come out perfectly formed. Like actually, you're probably going to write a really shitty first draft. Great. Now you've got something to work with.
Yeah, and I think I shared this quote, but Dave Grohl, the lead singer of the Foo Fighters, actually has a great quote that he shares, which is just to be brave enough to suck at something new today. You know what I mean? And what you just touched on is really important. And I've talked about this probably on nearly every episode of the show, but just the idea that the ego doesn't care. Your ego does not care about your happiness, and it sure as hell doesn't care about your success. So what you get to do is just trust that you are going to put something out there whoever is meant to see it, love it, appreciate it will. And also that you're going to continue to get better at your craft over time just by nature of doing it. Like, oh, go ahead.
Well, and even if you quote unquote fail, like I think new doors open, right? So I remember I was working on a memoir that still has not been published, still has not been picked up, but I was working on this memoir and I was so attached to like, I want to get this memoir out. And I submitted to a bunch of agents and it was rejected because they basically all said like, who are you? You have no platform. Like, this is great writing, but you're a nobody. And,
yeah.
And in the process of writing that memoir, I realized like just what I have to offer in terms of the conversation around race and my biracial identity. And PS, so like from that, the Demystifying Diversity podcast was launched. The On Being Biracial podcast was launched. I did a TED Talk, right? Like now my memoir still has not been published. Like that is still a like quote unquote failure. And yet so much of the work that went into that, the cultivation of my own storytelling abilities as they pertain to myself, because up until that point, I've been doing a lot more fiction. And so this was like my willingness to get my own story out there. Without that preparation, I don't think I would have, I know I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing. And there's so many people so much more successful than I am who that is their story, right? They started out with one business idea that failed, but it created the genesis for something new and something different. Or maybe they were, Stu, I'm sure you've talked about your story, like you were on a certain career trajectory that, and I don't even know how that career worked out for you, but I think you being on that trajectory enabled you to meet the love of your life, right? And so like sometimes just in doing the things that we're doing, getting too attached to this one thing succeeding can block me. It's blocked me from being able to see like, oh my gosh, this was a critical step in the process of my life. And I think for me, I have a rich spiritual belief system. And so I really believe that if I'm continuing to align with my soul's purpose or the will of my higher energy or life force, good things are going to happen, but they're not always going to happen in the way that I think they're going to. And there's a kind of like a great mystery around the unfolding.
Yeah, so I would love to hear you expand on that a little bit, actually. So basically, what we're touching on, and forgive me for watering this down, but just the idea of for you to accomplish anything great, any big goals, to be the architect of the life of your dreams, you get to do a lot of trusting the process, but also taking the strong, committed actions in a direction. And the trusting part is so difficult for so many people. And yes, exactly like me, you had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of doors that opened that you didn't know were going to open. And
Yeah.
so with your spiritual practice, with whatever support systems you have, what did that look like for you, staying in alignment, staying engaged? And what do you feel like is most useful for people listening to this to know?
Sure. Well, it's still something I practice every day. I wake up every morning and I journal. I read The Artist's Way years ago, and
Mhm.
Julia Cameron has this great exercise where you basically write 3 pages in the morning. And for me, I write 3 pages like it's a conversation with God every morning, right? And so I'm constantly asking, what should I be doing? Like, help me with this thing. I'm going to, dump my problems or my concerns in your lap. And then you give me some feedback, give me some sustenance, give me some support. Right. And so I'm constantly in that conversation and really asking for guidance and direction over the course of every day. And I don't trust. Like I don't ever trust in advance. I think it's part of the way that I'm wired. God has like shown up for me a million times. I've been saved from like horrible bulimia, childhood trauma, like all these
Mhm.
things. And I don't know, like my brain is just wired. So I'm anxious and I always feel like everything's going to fall apart. But I ask for guidance and wisdom and direction and I follow it, not trusting actually most of the time when I'm following that guidance, wisdom, and direction. And then what happens is these miracles happen inside of me and outside of me. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, yeah. That was what was supposed to happen. Like that was because I was aligned with, with divine purpose or energy. But Stu, like it doesn't matter how many times I prove to myself that that alignment works, I am still afraid every day that it's not going to work. And so I think in the same way that people have the expectation that like, oh, every time I sit down to write, it's going to be good, or oh, I've got to feel inspired to do what I want to do. Like, I don't actually think I have to trust the universe or God or whatever it is in order to align myself with it. I think I just have to practice aligning myself with it. And through that practice and that process, I find evidence of how God showed up for me. But if I'm waiting to trust in order to take the action, I mean, I'll never, I would never do anything.
Yeah, no. And you just, that's amazing, because I think a lot of people need to hear that sometimes you need to just put a lot of energy in one direction before you see any results. And, I love that you journal every morning.
Mhm.
And, I think that's an amazing grounding ritual. And for you, I know it's a conversation with God. I guess I'm curious, what advice or suggestions do you have for people just to get them to show up, or to help people show up to do something like that when the results aren't readily available or going to take some time to develop?
Yeah. So I think other people are essential. I think that like who we surround ourselves with really makes a difference in our lives. And so I have people in my life who are very supportive of me and very much encourage me and see the things that I can't see. Like when I when I call a friend and I say, my career isn't working out, or I had this rejection letter, or just I'm bored, or whatever it is, and they remind me of the purpose that I've shared with them. And actually, you've been this person for me at various times. When I've hit roadblocks or whatever, and I've called you and said like, this is what I'm going through. And so I think even though I'm sharing about my spiritual practice, which does feel very personal to me,
Sure.
it's been important for me to surround myself with people who have my back, who kind of can keep the bigger picture in mind in the moments when I can't, or when I get divorced from my purpose. So I think that's a part of it. And then also just like honesty. I mean, I think really what I've learned is that the more transparent and vulnerable I can be, the more space that I'm creating for support to flow into my life, whether that be in the form of other people or an inspiration or just whatever it is. And I spent a lot of years really walled off and very detrimentally independent. And I think that for me, part of my process to creating a life that I really love most of the time and I'm pretty happy in has been admitting when I'm not so happy in it, and sharing about my struggles and sharing about the fears that I have about myself and about my work and about my worth, and and all of that. So I think really just being vulnerable and admitting our frailties and like allowing ourselves to have the rich, messy, complicated human experience, for me is part of aligning myself with divine purpose, and knowing that I'm going to make mistakes. Like I mean, not too long ago I fell flat on my face, like, and it was fine. It was fine to fall flat on my face. And I think that's part of it too, is that I can think I'm doing everything right and things can turn out really not how I want them to. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it just goes back to releasing the attachment, I think, of what things have to look like. And
Yeah.
I know we keep coming back to trust, but sometimes y'all, trust is just showing up and continuing to do the work, reaching out for support, but also just checking in with yourself, listening to those quiet cues that we spoke about at the beginning of
Yes.
this episode, and in terms of maybe what is and isn't working. And, I'm just curious. I know we've touched on it a bit, but rejection is a big part of being a writer.
Yes.
I'm wondering if there are any rejection letters or notices that something wasn't picked up that really stuck out above the rest, and maybe what the lessons were in that moment.
I think this is going to sound so trite, but I don't really think anyone can reject me unless I reject myself. Like I think really
Yes.
it's my self-rejection that's the issue. One thing though that I can say that I learned in improv. So I do comedy improv. It's like super fun. It's part of, I think, my self-expression. But one thing that I learned is how sometimes people will say no with a smile and how confusing that is. And I think for me, those have been the worst rejections. The people that are like, I really love what you did and everything about it was great, but no. Like those are the most confusing for me because I am a person who like really genuinely wants to get better and evolve and like so I don't actually, I think for the most part I appreciate rejection when it comes with some constructive feedback that I can use to grow. I think the rejection in quotes that has been the most painful for me is when someone seems to be saying yes, 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 and then that yes becomes a no. And that's happened to me many, many times in my career as a writer. And that yes becomes a no with like no real reasoning or nothing I can work on, or sometimes in the professional publishing world people will just ghost, which feels like they wouldn't do that like in a professional setting, but yeah, like people do, editors can ghost
Sure.
sometimes. And I think like anything else, like dating, like just like anything else in life, having the experience of thinking something is going a certain way and then being told no without any justification, that's always the hardest for me because I want reasons. I want to be able to figure things out. I want to be able to improve. But yeah, as long as I don't take on that person's rejection as evidence that I don't deserve to be doing what I'm doing, it's always actually been like a source of motivation or support, or I've learned something from every rejection, or yeah, I don't know. I don't really think it has been devastating to me, except in the moments when I couldn't figure out where it was coming from.
Yeah. Listening to you share that, I actually think of when I was applying to college. So I was a straight A student. I grew up in California. I applied to a lot of very hard to get into schools. And just to juxtapose two of them, hoping that this provides value for the
Yeah.
listeners here. I remember I didn't get into UCLA. It was very cut and dry. They were like, you are a very highly qualified applicant. We wish you all the success in the future. We had 52,000 applicants for 2,700 slots.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not personal, but that's just the math.
Yep.
I was able to take that much easier than I was the one I got from North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which came on this piece of paper that was like 80% cotton. Like it was actually like a really expensive piece of paper. And it was like this flowery, beautiful, prosaic, like the doors of North Carolina will always be open to you and blah, 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 with no real reason or explanation why. And then at the end, it says, and we hope you'll cheer on the men's basketball team during this year's NCAA tournament. And that one hurt so badly
Yeah.
as a as a 18-year-old kid trying to figure out what college he's going to, because it wasn't constructive. It wasn't any type of anything useful for me.
Yeah.
And so obviously life doesn't give us the opportunity to get the constructive feedback all the time. And my encouragement to the listeners, I'm wondering what your thoughts are, is just to continue to show up for yourself and to, again, seek support from people that actually will give you the time and the courtesy of the constructive feedback. And so one thing I did want to ask you about is you have given a TED Talk.
Yes.
I've listened to it multiple times. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
And, I know that in our society today, giving a TED Talk is something a lot of people aspire to do. And it's also a process to get in and to get approved. And so I would love to just hear what your experience has been submitting for a TED Talk, getting in the process, and what were the lessons you learned?
Yeah, I love you asking that question because here we are talking about rejection and and all these things and I almost forgot about this, but the true story is that I'd applied for I think one or two TED Talks before I was accepted and no response, just applied
Sure.
and never heard back, which is fine, that's totally fine. And then when I did my TED Talk, I had my business partner who Zach James, shout out to Zach, who's wonderful. He had
Awesome
gone to
guy.
this, yeah, he is. He's one of my favorite people. He'd gone to this networking event and heard that the Lehigh Valley, which is sort of an hour away from where I live in Philadelphia, was having a TEDx, event, or they were, hosting a new round of speakers and they were opening for submissions. And so he called me and he said, "You've got to do this." And I was like, fine, I'll apply. And so I did. I applied, and I think within a few days, they got back to me and said, "Hey, let's have a meeting. We love your application. Let's, have a Zoom and talk about it." And so we did. And I assumed that the Zoom was going to be me interviewing for like them interviewing me. But really, when we showed up to the conversation, they were like, "Well, so if you want to do this," and I was like, "What are you talking about? Of course I want to do it. Like, of course, I'm all in." But when I tell that story, when I tell the part of the story where I sent in the application and like 2 days later they accepted me and we sat down and it was just a formality, like, it makes it sound like so easy. But the truth is that I'd been rejected twice, at least twice before, by other institutions that were having TEDx talks. And so, yeah, like I think it was that particular process with that particular institution was very easy. And if I had let my previous rejections kind of determine the value that I thought I had to offer, I would not have applied. And very much, we're talking about other people who have our backs and are in our corners. I mean, if Zach hadn't called me and said, "You're doing this," I wouldn't have applied either. So I think it's really important to have people who can be your eyes and ears for different opportunities because, yeah, I don't know, just so many of the various things that we were talking about sort of were borne out in that particular illustration. And then doing the TED Talk itself was great. They hold your hand quite a lot. I'm sure that people are aware of this if they've seen TED Talks, but there's a bit of a formula. And so, it's just a process, but like anything else, right? I didn't know how to do it going into it. And I learned because there, of a lot of really great allyship and observation and a willingness to be open to a different way of doing things. And it's been overall, I would say, a really good experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and 1000% everybody, we're gonna put this in the show notes so that you can listen to Daralyse's TED Talk. And I would encourage anybody, because we just keep seem to getting back to it over and over again, is don't let other people determine your worth for you.
Mm,
Like if you
yeah.
have a message, if you have something that you just feel called to put out into the world, not everyone's necessarily going to understand it, but operating from the lens that maybe it's just not for them specifically.
Yeah. Well, I would add to that, Stu, because it's really, I hear what you're saying about not letting other people determine your worth. And I think that's really valuable advice. And I will also share that I am someone who really felt worthless for a long time and really hated
Mhm.
myself for a very, very long time. And so I also was not trustworthy to determine my own worth when I was in that place. And I sort of had to lean into the people around me who loved me, who could see what I couldn't see in myself. And they would tell me things like, "You have value and you're kind and you're loving and you deserve good things and you're, whatever, you're special, you're beautiful," all these things. And I couldn't really internalize it or believe it. But for me, I had to kind of hold on to like, well, maybe some of what they're saying could be true. Maybe some of what they're seeing in me could be true. Because for a long time, I didn't really want to get out of bed in the morning. I didn't feel worthy. I mean, it's been decades since I felt that way, but I still didn't feel that way for a long time. And so I think for me, it's more like you're wonderful and worthy as you are. That's just true of all human beings. I just believe that every
Yes.
single human being is wonderful and worthy and
Yes.
has redemptive qualities and has made mistakes and is
Yes.
imperfect and is lovable as they are. And so that is the truth. And if that is the truth, any evidence that supports that, use it. Use it in service of you and your purpose. And anything that does not support that is just not true. Like, and so I kind of feel like for me, it's been helpful to use other people's opinions of me in the moments when I don't feel worthy to support my coming back to my own inherent value. And people that do not support my worthiness, it's been important for me to not take that on. So in the same way that I said, like I can't reject, or someone else can't reject me if I don't reject me, I also feel like, you know, if I am committed to coming back to my own worth and value, then anything that I use, whether it's inside of myself or outside of myself, to support me in doing that is going to be really helpful. So I don't know, for anyone who's out there like struggling and doesn't feel worthy, it's okay for you to ask the people who love you to give you some feedback. And even if you can't internalize it all the way, maybe just internalizing it like 5% could be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really key because we almost all of us are blessed to have somebody who, you know, can't sing our praises enough.
Yes.
But with that said, I know I was this way for a very long time, and it's admittedly something I still struggle with here and there, but not letting it in, like not
Yeah.
letting the love in. And I'm curious what your suggestions are to get people to just open up for themselves to receive love and affection and support.
Oh my gosh. All right. So here's where I will admit to really being new at this myself. And Stu, you and I met. So to anyone listening, Stu and I met during a leadership development training, became fast friends. It was like a very sacred and intense process. And Stu, I don't know if you remember this, but there was one activity that we were doing where basically it was like giving positive feedback to someone. And I got all
Yeah.
this positive feedback and I just started to like cry because I couldn't take it in and I didn't feel worthy of that. And that was what, 2019 or something. So it wasn't that long ago.
It was actually 4 years ago this weekend, believe it or not.
Wow. Yeah. So 4 years ago. And I think, I'm marginally better now. Like I mean, but I do struggle to receive. I do. I still have walls up. I think some of those have served me really well, considering the background that I come from, and like we're really erected as a mode of self-protection. But it is hard for me sometimes to let love in. And I think like anything else, we're talking about practice, right? The discipline and the practice. Like someone used to say something to me that was kind, and I used to completely block it and run away, even if only in my mind, like, and come up with all of the evidence as to why that wasn't true. And now I can just sort of sit with it for a couple of moments and tell myself, this could be true. Or,
Mhm.
like, yeah, I can kind of believe this, even if I think that they're skewed towards the positive and that they can't see the full picture of me. Like maybe what they said does have some inherent truth. So I'm getting better, but yeah, I don't know that I can really, like, I feel like you would be better at answering this question than I would, because it's something I still really have to work on.
So I'm going to volley this back to you, give you a little bit of credit. So during that leadership program, you actually said something to me, and it truly quite possibly was just something that was in the moment on your heart, excuse me, but changed my life. And it's basically, you know, something to the effect of, Stu, you are an incredibly emotionally available guy, but because you're turning it all inward on yourself, you're not allowing yourself to connect with anybody because
Mm.
you're not receiving other people.
Mm.
And that absolutely blew my mind. It took me a really long time to like really absorb all of that into my brain, so to speak. But I thought about that over and over and over again. And maybe just to put it a little more succinctly, I heard this on another podcast. It's called What's Next. It's hosted by a guy named Eric Wood, who
Mm.
former NFL player. He has former NFL players on his show, and it's all about like, what are they doing next after
Yeah.
NFL football? Had a really vulnerable conversation with another NFL player about not receiving compliments.
Mm.
And I, I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting who his guest was, but he basically just said, when you're not when you're deflecting or not allowing the other person's compliments or praise or whatever the case may be to land, you're actually denying them. You're actually deflecting the connection. You're deflecting the
Mm.
relationship and the opportunity for that relationship to go deeper.
Yeah.
And so, my challenge to anybody listening to this, if you are somebody who's super hard on yourself, hold yourself in really low regard,
Mhm.
and people are telling you that, you know, you're actually a lot better than you think you are,
Yeah.
what is possible for you if you allow some of that to land? And how can you receive that person and develop that relationship further just by allowing their love and affection for you to be reciprocated in that way?
And I think your audience is like a bunch, we were talking before, and you were saying it's like a lot of high achieving people, a lot of, people who are really motivated by doing. And I think one of the great lies that my brain has told me historically is that I have to be motivated. I motivate myself by self-criticism, right? Like, and the moment that
Ooh,
I
okay.
sit down and am like, oh yeah, I'm wonderful and I love myself, is the moment that I'm going to stop growing or stop moving or stop
Wow.
evolving. And I have found the exact opposite to be true, that actually, like, the battering ram of my brain has never been my friend. That, like, the
Mm-mm-mm.
self-love and openness and curiosity and a willingness to just be human and show up and fall forward, like that is what has been responsible for all of my success, in spite of a brain that often pulls me, rips me apart. And my brain rips me apart a lot less the more I lean into, that self-love and allowing others to love me as I am and believing them, and and showing up for myself consistently and reparenting, and all of those things, like, they become their own kind of like self-sustaining cycle where more happens, more movement, more momentum, more progress, more life, more money, more, all of those things. And I'm not one who really believes in manifestation in the traditional sense where, if I sit and I think about this particular thing, I can then go out and make that thing happen. But I do believe that if I have positive thoughts about myself and cultivate positive feelings, it's more likely that good things are going to come my way, and then I'm going to be open to them when they do, and I'm not going to purge them because I'm going to feel worthy of holding on to them. And so through that, I do believe that there's a sort of manifestation that happens that is not so attached to outcomes that, like, I need to have the exact house that I want and the exact
Yeah,
car
yeah.
that I want and the exact whatever, but the overall spirit of my life today is directly aligned with the quality of my thoughts and the quality of my feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think maybe just to put a bow on it, everything that Daralyse just shared, y'all, is true. Like, I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in the lives of people I care about deeply, including Daralyse. And, you know, at the end of the day, like, you also just get to be open to receiving what
Yeah.
it is that you actually want to receive.
And there's always going to be something to love and there's always going to be something to judge, right? And so like what do we want to focus on? And I've found that my career is like this incredible winding prickly road that is just so I love it. I'm so in awe of what I get to do with my life every day. And it's not something I ever could have charted for myself. And it's also something where, I mean, Stu, I think I had shared this with you. Like, I got asked to do a TED talk, and I was like, oh my gosh, but I, people are gonna. I actually just had like a lot of self-esteem issues come up around body image. Actually, like I wasn't worried about my content. I wasn't worried about any of that, but I was like judging myself. And I think I spoke to a friend, and she was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You know, are you going to be like, are you going to let your self judgment block you from the joy of being able to do that? And I realized like, no, actually, no. And I did it and it was fine and it was awesome and it got great feedback. Um, but I could have certainly gone into it with judgment or allowed my self judgment to stop me from going and doing that. And so I just feel like every day it's like, which wolf do I want to feed? You know, that old
Mhm.
proverb or parable or whatever. And I want to feed the wolf of like love and joy and reciprocity and receptivity and all of that. And it doesn't mean the other one's not there, but it's, you know, it's slowly been starving, I would say, for the last couple of decades. And it's great.
So, just maybe to ask directly, do you feel like choosing love and happiness and joy, is that a choice every day?
Today it is. I think there was a period in my life where I didn't have the capacity to choose that, and I needed to get a lot of outside help in order to be able to choose that. But yeah, today I do have that choice, and it's a choice that I think comes up multiple times every day. And sometimes I don't choose the love and I don't choose the joy, but then, you know, I'm better at catching myself and then making that choice again. You know, we talked about alignment, like continuing to align myself back with those values is really important. And it's a daily practice. And like any other practice, you know, like meditation, right? We get distracted, but it's can I bring myself back to that? And the more that I can, the better my life gets on the outside, yes, but I think it's the inside that's so much more important because I have had everything I could have ever wanted and been miserable, and I've had nothing I wanted and
Yeah.
been happy, and everything in between. So I really believe that the more I can align myself with that, the more my insides change, and the more my outsides change. But there are many people who have outsides that are far better than anything I could ever dream of, and they're not happy. So I think it really has to, for me, be about both.
Yeah. Yeah, amen to that. And I truly could, go on just off of what you just said for like a whole nother hour. And I know we could keep this going probably another couple of hours. This has been a really amazing conversation. And, before we sign off here, where can people connect with you? Where's the best place for them to get in touch? Yeah, how would you like them to reach out?
Sure. So people can go to my website, daralyselyons.com. I assume you'll put a link to that in the show notes because my
Absolutely.
name is very unique. They can also go to demystifyingdiversitypodcast.com or onbeingbiracial.com. There's links to all my social medias on, you know, all of those three websites. And yeah, and please do reach out. I love hearing from people. I love engaging in new conversations, and I'd be honored to hear from any of your listeners.
Absolutely, guys. And I know that this was a valuable conversation today and would love to hear from you what the most valuable takeaways were, the nuggets, the aha moments. Please put those in the comments, tag myself, tag Daralyse also, because she is somebody that I think we can all continue to learn from. And I think, I know you're the host of the Demystifying Diversity podcast, but you have been somebody that has demystified, I think, a lot of what success is and what it can look like, at
Mm,
least for me. So I
yeah.
was super grateful to have you on the show. And so before we sign off officially, Daryl, I just want to ask you, what are you acknowledging yourself for today?
Oh gosh. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone listening. This has been a great conversation and the time has flown. Um, I guess what I'm acknowledging myself for today, I'll be brave and I'll share this. I recently got into a new relationship and
Let's go.
I know. And to your point about being open to love and open to kind of just receiving, I'm allowing myself to be happy. Like, which is great, which is new behavior for me, not professionally, but personally. So I'm gonna acknowledge myself for that, for allowing myself to meet someone new and be open to that. And we'll see where it goes. But I think it's progress for me to be putting energy and attention into my personal life because that's an area that historically has been a little harder for me than the professional.
Mhm. Yeah. And, I acknowledge you, first of all, for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing, but also, just continuing to take yourself on and,
Yeah.
being somebody that's committed to your own personal growth. And, the work you put out journalistically is amazing. And, can't wait to see what you continue to create for yourself in your personal life.
Thank you so much. And thanks for being a big part of it.
Absolutely. And folks, again, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been your inside track to success. Again, I'm your host, Stewart Kraintz. Please hit like, hit follow, hit subscribe. Again, please leave a review so that this becomes a little bit more relevant in search and so more people can get this information as well. And so, again, thank you all for joining us today. We'll catch you next time.